Have you ever had one of those moments where you are completely convinced that your reality is the only possible one? Because I seem to be finding myself in these conversations a lot here lately. I was having what felt like the same difficult conversation again and again with different people in my life. And each time it left me walking away emotionally exhausted. The pattern was always the same. We'd experienced the exact same situation, yet somehow we walked away with completely different interpretations of what had happened. At first, I did what I think many of us do, which is I wondered who was right and where's the truth in it all, and how could our realities be so different? It felt impossible that both versions could exist simultaneously. Someone had to be wrong, right? But what really hit me was realizing I had a choice to make in these moments. When it was painful to hear the other person's perspective, when it genuinely hurt to discover how they had experienced our shared reality so differently than me, I had to decide. Was I going to let pride or love make the ultimate decision about keeping this person in my life? For me, I always tend to come to the same conclusion when this happens, and that is that I'd rather put my pride away because I loved this person too much to let my ego ruin what we had. And it got me thinking about so many conflicts I've witnessed in relationships in general and how often they simply crumble because we choose our pride over our love for the person. It's like we're driving on the same highway, but in completely different lanes. Both journeys are real, both experiences are valid, but we're seeing entirely different scenery along the way. Hey there, fellow travelers, and welcome back to Get In You Are Driving, where we explore what it means to take the wheel in life's journey. I'm your host, Maria, and I want to share something with you that I think many of us forget too much, which is that we are in control and we have so much more control than we think in life. Because when you think about it, life is a lot like driving from unexpected breakdowns to regular maintenance to sudden detours and so much more. And in this podcast, we'll uncover and we will discuss the many lessons that being on the road can teach us. I want you to always remember that we can't control what happens to us, but we can choose our direction, our attitude, and our response. Sure, the road may get bumpy, and sometimes it may feel like life has thrown us into the passenger seat. But at the end of the day, this is what I always know to be true, which is you are the one driving, and sometimes all you need is the courage to get back in the car day after day. So, today we're diving deep into this concept that two things can be true at the same time. We'll talk about why relationships matter so deeply in our lives, how to practically navigate these dual realities, and most importantly, how to stay in the driver's seat of your own life while making room for other people on the road. Because as you know, when you drive, there's many other cars. You're never the only one. Because this is what I've learned that when two people share a journey, they're often looking at very different maps. And that's not just okay. That's more than okay because that's part of make that's part of what makes the human experience so rich that we all experience things so uniquely. So, let's get into today's episode. So, before we get into anything, I want to talk about why this all matters, why relationships matter. And I think it's because there are some people who I know because I've met them don't think relationships are important. And I'm talking about all types of relationships. I'm not just talking about romantic ones. And yeah, there's a lot of people that put relationships and prioritizing people on the back burner. And if that's you, that's okay. I'm not trying to make you feel badly, but I want to say that this is your decision, but I am just here to tell you why I personally think relationships are so valuable in life. And I am going to include one scientific study that Harvard did on this because, yeah, science actually proves how important good relationships are in our life. So let's get to it. Like I always say in this podcast, do not take what I say at face value. Everything I talk about is from my personal experience, my opinions. Um, So, yeah, I always put a written disclaimer at the bottom if you want to check that out because, yeah, this is just my experience that I'm sharing with you. I am not an expert in any of this. So, what I want to share now is this Harvard study with you that gave a lot of proof on the importance of relationships in our life. And I also wanted to include this episode in general because I think that relationships are such a major aspect of our lives, but we do not get taught how to deal with relationships, how to emotionally regulate, how to manage them, how to deal with our own emotions, how to deal with difficult people. Like, think about it. In high school, they don't teach you any of this. In college, they don't teach you any of this. But what a valuable skill to have because there's always going to be relationships in your life. I mean, even if you're the person that doesn't want relationships, you still have to have a job and have coworkers, right? Like you just can't avoid other people in life. And I think life is a lot more difficult when you don't know how to navigate your relationships around you. So, yeah, even if you don't care about people, they're around you all the time. All right, I digress. Let's get into it. At the core of everything, our happiness, success, and even our sense of purpose are the relationships we build. I really think that they're the foundation upon which life rests. I think, side note, COVID taught us this because when the world slowed down and you couldn't do anything, where did we go? We went to our families. We really realized how at the end of the day, it's just about the people that we love and wanting to spend time with them because, we didn't want them to literally die. So I thought about that a lot during COVID. Not sure if you did. Um, all right, when relationships are strong, I think life does feel more meaningful, and I do think when they're strained, it does weigh us down. But this is where it gets really complicated with any type of relationship because two people can experience the same moment in a relationship in completely different ways. Let's say one person may feel unheard while the other person feels like they're trying their absolute best, or one may feel abandoned while others feel like they're giving all they can to that person, or one may think a conversation was just a small agreement while the other carries it like an emotional wound all around. And again, with all of these dual realities, we need to acknowledge them because I think these are some of the things like relationships with other people essentially create some of life's deepest suffering. So again, I just think this is so important to talk about. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the hidden cost of unresolved relationship conflicts. I think some of our biggest emotional pains and our traumas from what has happened with us due to relationships with other people are what we believe happened. I also think this has so much to do with the stories we tell ourselves about people, which is something I'm going to get into later because I think this is so important. And I think we all need to understand that misunderstandings and different perspectives, when they're left unaddressed, they don't just strain relationships, but I think they can really impact our mental health, our productivity, and maybe even our ability to find meaning. So, how many relationships have you seen lost, not because two people didn't care, but because they couldn't see each other's truth? I don't know about you, but I've seen this a lot. All right, and I told you I had a study, and the science of relationships and life satisfaction. So, research shows that relationship quality is the number one predictor of overall life satisfaction. The Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest running studies on happiness, proves that the strongest indicator of a fulfilling life is not money, career success, or even health. It's the strength of our relationships. But here's the catch. Happiness in relationships isn't always about agreeing. It's about learning to hold two truths at once. The ability to say, I see your experience, but mine is valid too. This isn't just about having better conversations, it's about creating a meaningful life because I don't think we're meant to do life alone. Relationships are what shape us in ways that we don't always realize because they can actually challenge us in very healthy ways. They can heal us, they can remind us who we are. I mean, think about all your best experiences in life. You probably experienced them with someone, or if you didn't, you wanted to tell that special someone about it. So, again, the moments that probably mean the most to you where you were felt understood, seen, and alive, they probably involve other people. So, if two things can be true at once, then maybe the key to better relationships isn't proving one side, but learning to hold space for both. At the end of the day, again, I don't think life isn't measured by what we achieve, but by who we experience it with. So let's stop taking relationships for granted because I think we're all guilty of this. And this is going to be my reminder in the podcast to everyone listening that if there is somebody in your life, whether that be your spouse, your friend, your parent, tell them how much you appreciate them and all that they do for you because I think that it's so common to forget all the things other people do that get make our life richer and better. So take the time to write them a text or call them and say, "Hey, hun, I appreciate that you bought the groceries this week and cooked the food. Hey, hun, I appreciate that you're always the one that takes the trash out," or small or big, whatever it may be. Let's learn to do that and do that more often because we all want to be loved and appreciated at the end of the day. And now let's go into how to keep driving our own car, even when the person in the passenger seat sees a completely different view than us. All right, so I'm sure you have all been, and so have I, in an argument where you are convinced that you're absolutely right, only to realize that if you do enter an intimate conversation with somebody about this, that the other person had an equally valid perspective. And this is what I want to dig into today. So, relationships create this unique phenomenon where two truths can exist simultaneously because it's like two people standing on the opposite sides of a mountain, right? One could see the sunrise, the other could see the sunset, but they're looking at the same mountain. Um, this creates, I think, a lot of pain and a lot of confusion because as humans, we have a very deep tendency to believe our perspective is the real one, right? Like we're all guilty of this. We think, how could they possibly see it that way? Like, I'm so offended. Were they even there when this occurred? Like, are they even listening to what I'm saying, right? Like, we get so caught up in, like, what do you mean you're upset about this too? And I think that, again, this creates a lot of pain because we get so caught up in defending our version of reality that I think we forget something so crucial, which is your experience and my experience can both be completely true at the same time. And this is something that I noticed. Relationships don't usually fail because people stop caring about each other. I think they tend to fail because we can't acknowledge the other person's reality as valid alongside our own. And there's many other reasons, of course, but we are sticking with this major one today. And let's say maybe it's a sibling or a parent, like fail. I guess you would think that more of like in terms of a divorce, but maybe if the relationship doesn't fail, there's a lot of cold blood between you. Like you don't talk a lot, right? Like that's not a failed relationship, but that's a strained relationship. So I'm talking about all those types of things, but I feel like when I'm using the word fail, it probably sounds more like a divorce or something, or you just don't talk to that person anymore. Um, and now I actually want to get into um two truths, one relationship, and I want to get into the breakup analogy. Now, I don't know if you've ever watched the breakup with Jennifer Aniston and Vince Vaughn, but there's this one scene that just hits because it's so freaking real. And I felt like it was so archetypical, is that a word? For what I want to talk about today. If you are somebody that doesn't like spoilers for movies, Anna, I'm talking to you. You can leave right now. I have one friend that absolutely cannot stand if you talk about a movie or even an episode of the show because she is convinced she will see it at some point in time. So, yeah, if you don't want spoilers, sorry, sucks to suck, then you can go. Anyways, so okay. All right, we have Jennifer Aniston and we have Vince Vaughn, and they're a couple and they've been together. And at the end of the movie, she's crying, telling him, "Our entire relationship, I have gone above and beyond for you. I've cooked, picked things up, laid your clothes out, supported you, made the plans, and I feel like you didn't appreciate any of it. And he's just standing there completely blindsided saying, "Why didn't you just tell me?" And she said, "I tried." And then he says, "But not like that." And then this is where it really unravels. He's not wrong because, okay, here's Jennifer Aniston's character, so broken down, so sad. It really, for the first time, admitting like how she truly felt about it. And he's like, "But why didn't you just tell me in this way?" And I kind of agreed with Vince Vaughn. I agree with both of them, right? But when he said that, I was like, it's true. He's not a mind reader, and neither was she. And he didn't know how much all that she was doing mattered to her. But also, she wasn't wrong either because she did try, but she was exhausted from trying in ways that he never noticed. So while you watch the scene, or if you've seen it, right, neither of them were lying. Neither of them is making things up. They both were experiencing the relationship in completely different ways, right? Because they're two different people. And because they both only saw their own truth, they didn't meet in the middle really until now. And it wasn't really a meeting in the middle. Like at this point, the relationship was over with, and it was just them kind of like admitting things. Um, and honestly, what a tragedy, because how differently would it have been if Jennifer Aniston's character, I can't remember her name in the movie now, would have said when it like first happened, "Hey Vince, I just cooked this beautiful dinner and I invited our friends over, and now you're watching a game on TV, and I put a lot of work into this, and this makes me feel that you don't care about all this work that I put into this dinner, and that hurts me, and it's also making me lose respect for you as this is happening." I can guarantee, well, okay, I don't want to say guarantee. I can almost guarantee that if Jennifer Aniston, when this first started happening, would have went to Vince and told him that in a nonchalant, loving way, I bet your bottom dollar he would have been like, "Oh God, I don't want her to start losing respect for me. Like, I don't want to hurt her because I love her. Like, okay, I'm gonna like change my act." Now, I'm not saying this would always happen, right? But think about the times that you just humble yourself and you just tell the other person how you're truly feeling, but in a loving way and tone. I really think if that person loves you, they're going to be like, okay. So I just really thought this was such a great analogy. This was a romantic analogy, right? I think this happens all the time in romantic settings. I mean, again, this is why it was like an archetype. Her cleaning and being upset, him being like, "Oh, but I'm tired. I worked all day." I mean, literally, I had to include it. So, but I want to say that this isn't just about romantic relationships. I think it happens in friendships, families, work relationships, anywhere two people are trying to navigate their life together. This is going to happen, right? Two things can be true at the same time. And when we can recognize that, when we listen instead of just defending our own perspective, I really think this is when human connection freaking happens, because in relationships, the suffering comes, I don't think, from having different perspectives, but from insisting that only one perspective can be right and not wanting to listen to the other person. Because think about it. How many times have you been in a conversation where you're not even listening to the person? You're just waiting there, mentally thinking of what you're going to say and prove them right and prove them wrong so you can prove yourself right. And I'll admit, I've been there. I've had conversations with people like that where I'm like, I could care less how you feel. Meh, I already have my argument ready. But what if, what if, instead of trying to prove our reality is the correct one, we got curious about how the other person is experiencing this same situation so differently? So, again, what if the goal wasn't to determine who's right, but to understand that we're each seeing a different side of the same truth? All right, this is where the real work begins. And I stumbled across something that I really want to share, because learning how to hold space for two seemingly contradictory realities without trying to cancel one out is difficult. And it's not easy and it takes practice and it requires us to loosen our grip on being right. And it requires us to open ourselves to the possibility that there's more than one valid way to experience a situation. And when things do go wrong, because they freaking will. That's life, that's relationships. There is a powerful framework that I discovered by listening to a podcast that had the guest on called Paul Brunson, who apparently for a living helps people with their relationships. I didn't know you could do a living off of that. And he calls this the ARC method of apologizing. So A, R, and C stand for three things. A stands for acknowledge what happened. This is so powerful to simply acknowledge we upset or hurt someone. For example, just saying, I'm sorry I interrupted you in the argument, right? If you acknowledge that later on, you're acknowledging about what went wrong. So be specific about the action and whatever it was. And also, if you are unsure, ask the person because no one is a mind reader. Women may be a little bit more intuitive here, but even us, like we can't read your mind, men. So please let us know. And I really think that if we ask in love and with a loving tone and in the right context, the other person is going to be receptive, right? Because you're already saying, I acknowledge that I hurt you. All right, the R, remorseful. Here is where you are remorseful about the impact you had on the person. Because you could say something like, I'm sorry because I know that made you feel undervalued and unheard, right? This is crucial because you're acknowledging their emotional reality. For example, let's say this is romantic, it's between a male and a female. Females do tend to cry easier, right? Just we're generalizing. If you made her cry, my guy, like you need to understand. I think this is one of the biggest differences I see between men and women a lot. Women do tend to be more emotional. And I think sometimes men are just like, oh my gosh, like I don't get it. And I think there's something very dangerous about a man that is not moved by your emotions. Now, ladies, that is not me saying that we should be manipulating them all the time crying so that they do what we want. But for example, I'm really not somebody that cries a lot. But when I do, it's because I'm genuinely upset. And if I was with a guy and he wasn't remorseful about, baby, I'm so sorry I made you cry. Like that wasn't man, that'd be a tough relationship. So again, and same vice versa for men, right? Like if you say something that's really hurtful towards him. What could be really hurtful towards a man? Ooh, if you made a comment and we're like, you just need to grow up hair and man up. I don't think men love to hear that one. You need to be remorseful about the fact that that probably hurt his ego, right? So again, you need to acknowledge with this that the emotional reality was them for them was that they got upset. Whether you agree with it or not, this is a reality. They got emotionally upset. So this is huge because when conflict happens again, I think we focus on intent a lot. Like, well, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I wasn't trying to make you cry. And that's probably true, right? Like maybe in the context that I gave about the guy, maybe his intent really wasn't to make me cry. But nonetheless, I cried. The other truth is that I felt hurt. It made me cry. Both realities exist and both are true. I cried, but I also can believe that it's true that his intent wasn't to make me cry, right? I think the mistake people make here is dismissing the hurt just because it wasn't intentional. Like a lot of people will be really ugly about this and it'll spiral and they'll be like, but I didn't mean that. And the fact that you took it that way, well, that's on you. And I'm not sorry. And it's like, okay, but we have to acknowledge that it was still upsetting. So I see this happen a lot because again, they're so like, but that wasn't my intent, but that wasn't my intent. Okay, yeah, maybe it wasn't, but it still hurt me, right? That's a very real reality as well. So again, the key is balance. The key is talking this out because yes, emotions can sometimes exaggerate things. I want to acknowledge that. And I know I'm a person, especially as a female, I do try to make sure like, am I exaggerating this? But dismissing them entirely isn't the answer either. The middle ground is acknowledging both truths, like I said, and saying something like, I see how that hurt you, but that wasn't my intent, but I'm still sorry that it hurt you, right? That's where real understanding and compassion comes in. All right, so we had acknowledge what happened, be remorseful about the impact, C, commitment to change. He says this one is super important because in the future, you're going to say, honey, in the future, I will make a conscious effort to listen to you before fully responding and hopefully saying things so that you don't cry. Right, like let's say that's what it was. So, what I really loved about this framework is that it assumes people can't read your mind because they can't. And it creates space for both realities to exist. You're not just saying sorry to end an argument, you're acknowledging the impact of your actions on someone else's experience. And just remember that you're always driving your own car, even in your closest relationships. So you do get to respond, you get to decide how you respond when someone's reality is different from yours. And you can choose to make understanding the goal rather than winning the argument. And I really do believe that if you want to have good, healthy relationships, this is a wonderful framework to use when conflict arises. So, something that I have noticed is that when you have these very difficult, revealing discussions with people, it genuinely feels like open heart surgery, especially when it's your most intimate friends, family member, spouse, boyfriend, because you're so raw, you're exposed. And I think every natural human instinct is screaming, like, don't admit this, like, protect yourself, defend yourself. And we do, like, we naturally get so defensive. And I think that's why conversations about different perspectives can really turn into battlegrounds and not conversations because our survival instincts really do kick in and suddenly we're just not trying to understand, we're trying to win. um but here is a framework that I have found extremely powerful for moments like this, and one that helps me stay very firmly in my driver's seat of my emotions even when conversations get tough. So it comes from the one and only Mel Robbins in her Let Them Let Me theory. People, 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 if you have not read this book, go pick it up. Oh my gosh, it's so practical, such an easy read, and it really is life changing. If everybody took this perspective in life, we would live in a wonderful society. But let me break this down for you because it's completely changed how I look at relationship conflict. I think I was kind of like coming across my own understanding what she's talking about, but okay. So the first part is let them. And let them is about releasing control because this is the truth. You cannot control other people's actions, their opinions, their behaviors. You just can't. And trying to is like attempting to drive someone else's car from the passenger seat. Impossible. You can't. You can't even get your foot in the gas pedal. And if you try to do this at all, you're probably both going to die. Like, let's just be for real. It's exhausting, it's frustrating, and it's again totally impossible. So let them means accepting that others will do what they're going to do. If someone doesn't respond the way you expect in a conversation, let them. If they don't see a situation the way you do, let them. If they choose to walk away, let them. This isn't about being passive or letting people walk all over you. The let them theory is about recognizing that other people's choices reveal who they are, not who you are. So when you stop trying to control what you can, you find freedom. I remember having this very intense conversation with a close friend of mine where we had completely different memories of a very painful situation. And my very first instinct was to convince them that my version was right, right? To make them see it my way, to get defensive. But then I noticed that, okay, I'm going to shift. And I was like, I used the let them experience here because I said, let them have their experience, right? Let them think that's what happened. And when I did that, something really remarkable happened because one, like the tension just really dissolved. And suddenly I feel like when I chose to have this perspective in our conversation, things just calmed down and we actually wanted to hear each other. So, but this is where the magic really happens with let them. Because there's a second part to it, which is let me. And if I let them do what they want, then I must also let myself respond in a way that serves me. This is where your power lies. And here you do, well, let me choose my reaction. So let my friend think this is what happened, but let me understand and take responsibility to remember that two truths can be true at the same time, right? For using that as an example. When someone shows me who they are through their actions, I get to decide how I respond, not from a place of emotional reactivity, but from respect. Let me now set boundaries. I don't have to tolerate repeated disrespect or behavior that undermines my well being, even if I understand where it's coming from. Let me walk away when needed. I have permission to leave spaces where I feel consistently unappreciated or misunderstood. Let me focus on my growth. Someone else's opinion of me isn't my reality unless I choose to make it so. So, again, the mindset, let them, let me, keeps you firmly in your driver's seat during relationship conflicts. And it acknowledges that both realities while maintaining your agency. Honestly, I think it takes real courage and love to understand someone else's experience while still honoring your own. Because it's not about finding a compromise with this. I don't know if compromise could really exist here. I think it's about creating a space where both truths can exist fully and where the other person that you're having this difficult conversation with, again, feels acknowledged that you care about their perspective as well. So, I want you to think about a recent relationship conflict you've had and how maybe applying the let them and let me theory could have changed the outcome or could change the outcome if you decide to use this when another conflict comes up. Um, would it have given you more clarity about where your power actually lied in the situation? I really think so. So, again, one practical tool I use is what I call also the pause and choose technique. And I know that when I feel triggered by someone's different perspective, I literally will pause sometimes and I'll just sit there for a few seconds. Sometimes I ask for a moment to collect my thoughts. And for me, this creates space between the trigger and then my actual response where I can choose rather than react. So by me being quiet for a second and collecting my thoughts or telling them I need a minute, I know it won't be an emotional reaction. It will be, let me think about this. And this could look differently for everyone. So, do what works for you. But I know that I'm someone who needs a moment to collect my thoughts. And also, this is kind of a side note. But if you're in a romantic relationship, and honestly, this really does apply to all relationships, I think it's very important to have a very good conversation about what is your conflict style and talk about this when you're not in conflict because the worst time to know how someone reacts to conflict is when you're in conflict. And I really think that especially from a romantic point of view, be like, so how do you deal with conflict? Because it shows you a lot about the person. So again, we went over the let them, let me. I think that at the end of the day, we need to be understanding that other people experience two things. I mean, that other people are allowed to experience and react the way they want, but then going back to the let me, that let me know I can control my reaction and that let me remember that I'm driving my own car. Okay, I hope this is all making sense. So, we've talked about how two people can experience the same moment differently and how to stay in the driver's seat of your emotions with the let them, let me theory by Mel Robbins. But how do we actually build relationships where both realities can coexist? How do we create a shared roadmap, so to speak, where we're seeing different landscapes? Um, I want to get into this quote that I heard from another relationship coach. I hope I don't butcher her last name. Jillian Turecki. And I really loved it because she said, part of self awareness is bringing what is unconscious to consciousness. And I think that this is the first step in creating relationships that can hold dual truths. So the mind is tricky. And from what I've understood, um, what the mind does is it's designed to protect us. But she was saying that sometimes our mind protects us too much. And this is why mindfulness is a key pillar to successful relationships. Um, we constantly have to ask ourselves, how is our emotional state impacting our thoughts and our behavior, right? How you're feeling on a certain day in a certain season of your life, that is going to impact how you just exist with the other people around you. Could my current emotions be coloring how I'm interpreting this situation? Am I seeing things clearly? Or am I viewing this person through the lens of my past experiences? Trauma is a big one here. Again, I said in one of my other episodes, I really believe in understanding what has traumatized you so that you don't unconsciously react because you've been traumatized with someone else. Like, you don't, an old trauma trigger is now being triggered with somebody else that has nothing to do with that. You get what I mean. So, something that I believe is absolutely crucial in relationships, and this is one of the things that when I was listening to this Jillian Turecki talked about was accountability. And I would say that I'd go as far to say that accountability might be one of the most important things in a relationship because as she explained it, she said it was about being willing to be 100% responsible for your experience, your thoughts, your perspectives, and your behavior. But, and this is important, it does not mean the situation is 50% your fault, which I thought was interesting because sometimes one person really did cause the problem, but we still need to be very accountable for our projections. What's the projection? An example is you feel the person you're with doesn't love you, but deep down, you know you came into the relationship feeling insecure. Now you're projecting that insecurity onto them, interpreting their normal behaviors as signs that they don't care and love you. So, accountability in a relationship is the most important relationship skill to be able to take full responsibility for these things. And honestly, it's a very good way to measure in her way of talking about this is someone's character and emotional intelligence. And I had never thought about this like accountability thing and owning like what our experiences are, but it really like rang true to me because it just made a lot of sense. So when I know that when I, like, listened to that and when I shifted to taking responsibility for my experiences, my triggers, my reactions, my needs, I know something really big happened for me, which was I stopped needing others to validate my reality because I was validating it myself, and ironically, that created more space for them to actually hear me. Um, I think this is what true freedom really looks like in relationships. It's not about controlling the other person's perspective or making them match yours. It's about fully owning your own experience while allowing them to have theirs as well. Again, two things can be true at the same time because you're always driving your own car, even in your own relationships. And I say the car thing just to make you remember like you're in control. You decide how fast you get to go, your direction, and how much fuel you want to give an interaction. You choose when to pull over for a difficult conversation and keep moving forward. And honestly, sometimes I think the most loving thing you can do is acknowledge that even though you're traveling together, you do see it differently because you're two different people, but that both views are equally real. Okay, so I want to dive into something that has been super fascinating to me, and it's actually something that I said we would get into later, which is the stories the stories we create about others' intentions and actions. This was something that I heard from this Jillian Turecki. Also, I heard Mel Robbins talk about this, and I found it fascinating because our minds are meaning making machines. And when someone does something that affects us, we don't just experience what happened, we create narratives around why it happened. And this is where things get so complicated in relationships. So think about it. Let's say your friend doesn't text you back for 2 days. What story do you start telling yourself? They're ignoring me. She doesn't love me. She doesn't value my friendship. She's so busy. She's probably responding to her boyfriend, but she's not responding to me. They're mad at me about something. Like, right? We're telling ourselves this story. But what's the reality? Like, what if we actually stop to think, but what could be the reality in this situation? Maybe they're overwhelmed with work. Maybe they lost their phone. Probably unlikely, but hey, maybe they're going through something personal and they don't have the emotional bandwidth to respond to me right now, right? There's so many other possibilities. So the gap between what actually happened, which is that they didn't text you back, and the meaning we assign to it, which is they don't care about me, is I think where most relationship suffering occurs. And I think that this is where projection comes in because if you remember earlier, I mentioned projections earlier, and these are powerful forces that shape how we interpret other people's actions. A projection could be feeling, again, unloved by your partner when you actually came into the relationship knowing that you had this insecurity. Or, for example, you think someone is judging you when you're actually just judging yourself, or you believe someone is trying to control you when you're actually struggling with your own need for control. These are all projections. So, the tricky part is with projections is that they feel completely real. They don't announce themselves as projections. They show up more as they show up more disguised as clear perceptions of reality. So, the thing is, how do we recognize when we're projecting versus identifying a genuine issue in our relationship? I think this takes practice and self awareness. But here's a simple exercise that I call story checking that I think can really help. So, when you find yourself upset about something someone did or said, ask yourself, is this reality or a story I've created? Then break it down into these four things. What objectively happened? Just the facts. Just the facts. What meaning I'm assigning to it? What was the interpretation I gave it? 3, what other possible explanations could exist? And then 4, what's being triggered in me? So, let me share some common relationship conflicts where both people can be right and you can see this in practice. So, when one person feels neglected while the other person feels they're giving their all, one partner might be thinking, I'm working so hard to support us financially. Don't you see how much I'm sacrificing? While the other is thinking, you're physically here, but you're emotionally absent. Don't you see how lonely I feel? So, both experiences are valid, but both people, so okay, both experiences are valid and both people are seeing a legitimate part of the truth. Now, let's think about maybe also with this one different love languages, which create mixed max expectations. If your primary love language is quality time, but your partner's is acts of service, you might feel unloved even if they're expressing love in a way that makes sense to them. So, this person is expressing love in a way of, I am actively going to work and providing for this family. But because that's not your love language, that's not how you feel, but that's their love language because again yours was but you're physically like you're physically here but you're emotionally absent, so your love language is time but theirs isn't. Again, this all needs to be discussed. So with this example, when these dual realities clash, here's a practical script you can use. You can say something like, I understand that from your perspective, it feels like X. I can see why you would experience it that way. At the same time, from my experience, it feels like Y. So, again, whatever your experience is, throw that in there because to me, this acknowledges both truths without diminishing either one. And the goal really is here, it's not to determine whose version of reality is correct. It's to create a relationship where multiple truths can coexist and where your GPS can show different routes, but you guys are still headed in the same direction. And again, this idea of the story we are telling ourselves and the narratives we're creating is so powerful. And when I heard this, I really thought back on the stories I've created about like basically everyone. And I realized that I needed to stop doing that. So I really loved the exercise about the story checking. I think that's so huge. Again, what objectively happened, just the facts, what meaning I'm assigning to it, what was my interpretation, what other possible explanations could exist, and then what's being triggered in me. Because I think a lot of times we don't realize how so many of these things are buried deep within us. And the reason that we're actually upset about why a certain person did something or said something is because we have this like unresolved trauma with it, which is why I love Jillian Turecki's quote that I said before, that part of self awareness is bringing what is unconscious to consciousness. And I really do think that us understanding ourselves so well is the biggest first step in creating meaningful, healthy relationships. All right. We covered a lot of ground today. I really hope it all made sense. We covered dual truths, accountability, and the powerful let them, let me theory by Mel Robbins. But I want to bring it all together with what I believe is the most crucial choice we face in every relationship conflict, which is pride versus love. Um, I've found myself, like I said at the beginning, in a lot of these very difficult conversations lately, and they've sucked because I've been really hurt. I know the other person on the other end was also very hurt. At the end of the day, I realized when I was having these conversations, what got both of us actually through the situation was realizing, like, okay, I heard your side of the story, you heard mine, and I want you to know that I love you more than I care about being right. So I hope I acknowledged how you feel. I'm sorry I made you feel that way, but I don't want to let this continue affecting the relationship because I love you more than I care about being right. And when we're in conflict, I think pride asks, how can I prove I'm right? How can I show them I'm right? Right. But love asks, how can I understand you while honoring myself? And I think that this is the choice we face again and again and again in our relationships. Will I let my ego drive this, or will I allow love to take the wheel? So, the next time you're having a very difficult conversation with a loved one where you and someone important to you see things very differently, because this happens all the time, I want you to ask yourself, do I want to let my pride get in the way of this person that I love so much? Because it's so easy to forget how much we love someone, how much they mean to us when we're so annoyed at them. It's so funny how the ones we love the most can just annoy us the most. And this is just what I've learned and what I hope that you really do take away from today's episode, which is the moment I stop trying to control how other people act, I free myself. If they don't invite me, support me, or treat me the way I expect, let them. But just as important, if I want to protect my peace, focus on my growth, and set better boundaries, let me. Back to the let them, let me theory. And choosing love over pride while maintaining your driver's seat, I really think is the braver path to take in life. It's not easy, and it requires a lot of courage and humility to say that your reality matters to me, even when it's different from mine, and my reality matters too, because it does. I don't want this episode to at all sound like I'm saying that what you feel doesn't matter. It does, but what the other person feels matter as well. Because I think the true test of love isn't finding someone who shares your exact path and who always tells you who's right, but choosing to navigate life's roads together with that other person, even when you see, again, completely different landscapes along the way. Because remember that no matter who's riding with you, you are always the one in the car, and you get to make your own choices. And yeah, you get to choose how you react to everything. That's always something that I want to say in this podcast. So you get to be the person that makes the choice of let them think that, but let me take responsibility for my own actions or whatever it may be. Um, Before we wrap up, I want to remind you that if you found value in today's episode, consider sharing it with a loved one. Hey, maybe if you're having a fight with somebody, you're like, hey, I would love for you to listen to this podcast. It talks a lot about conflict and two things being true at the same time. Honestly, it'll melt the ice and maybe you have a really great conversation about it. So Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't already subscribed on YouTube or followed me on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please do because I absolutely love making this podcast. And again, thank you all for being here on this journey with me. What I say at the end of each podcast is remember, you're always the one driving in your life. Each day brings the chance for you to navigate challenges with courage, create meaning through intention, and choose the harder but braver path ahead. I really hope this episode makes sense. I really hope that you choose love over pride when conflict comes up. And until next time, remember, all you need is the courage to get in your car day after day and just keep on driving. Bye.